The Kepler graveyard was a tomb of rust and ghosts, a sprawling nebula where the metal bones of a forgotten war lay scattered between clouds of ionized hydrogen and silicate dust. It was a place the consortium had declared derelict, a navigation hazard best forgotten. But for Elias Thorne, it was home. He was a whisper in this dead kingdom, a salvager who knew the twisting currents of the debris fields and the groans of dying starships better than he knew the faces of other men. His ship, the Stray Dog, was a patchwork quilt of scavenged parts, its hull scarred with the stories of 1,000 close calls, its engine a low, asthmatic grumble that was the only lullaby his daughter, Lena, had ever known. She was the anchor of his universe, a small, fierce light in the oppressive dark, and she was fading. Her laughter, once the bright chime that echoed through the cramped corridors of their home asteroid, had grown quiet, her breaths shallow. The doctors on the Outer Rim station had given it a name as cold and sterile as their demeanor, synaptic decay syndrome, a slow, merciless unraveling of the nervous system, a genetic curse that had no cure, save one. Ethelred Biosynth, the consortium's crown jewel, held the patent on the only viable gene therapy, a sequence of retroviral agents so complex and proprietary they might as well have been magic. It was also priced like magic, a king's ransom that would take Elias 10 lifetimes of salvaging to afford. He had pleaded, bartered, and begged. He had offered his skills, his ship, his very life in exchange for a single dose. The replies were always the same: automated, dismissive rejections from a corporate entity that saw his daughter's life as little more than a rounding error on a quarterly report. The consortium didn't rule with fleets of dreadnoughts and legions of stormtroopers. It ruled with the cold, unyielding calculus of profit and loss. It crushed worlds not with bombs, but with predatory loans and impossible tariffs, bleeding systems dry until they submitted to corporate oversight. Their justice was swift, silent, and overwhelmingly efficient, administered by sleek, black enforcer vessels that appeared without warning and erased dissent with surgical precision. But in the heart of the graveyard, far from the consortium's well-patrolled shipping lanes, lay a legend. A ghost story whispered by grizzled old spacers and dismissed by anyone with sense. The Wraith. It was the last of its kind. A relic from the pre-consortium era, a prototype null space interceptor that had vanished during the final battle of the Unification War. Its drive system was said to be an abomination, a machine that didn't travel through space but punched holes in it, allowing for instantaneous, untraceable microjumps. The technology was deemed so destabilizing, so contrary to the ordered physics the consortium relied upon, that its very existence was scrubbed from the public record. They called the technology heretical, a violation of natural law. Elias called it his only hope. He found it wedged deep inside the shattered husk of a Leviathan-class dreadnought, the Iron Resolve. The Wraith was a shard of obsidian against the rust-red ruin, its angular, predatory lines shockingly intact, its composite alloy hull absorbing the faint starlight without reflection. For 6 months, he had worked in secret, tethering the Stray Dog nearby and running power umbilicals and diagnostic lines into the dead ship's guts. It was a painstaking, desperate act of technological necromancy. Every component was alien, built on a philosophy of aggressive, uncompromising warfare that the consortium had long since engineered out of existence. He bypassed ancient firewalls that fought back like living things, spliced, frayed power conduits that sparked with lethal energy and coaxed life back into systems that had been silent for over a century. The ship's AI was the greatest challenge. It was a fractured, schizophrenic intelligence, its memory banks corrupted by the trauma of its final battle and 100 years of silent decay. It didn't speak in coherent sentences, but in echoes, fragmented whispers that bled through the cockpit speakers, the terrified last words of its pilot, the clipped, professional warnings of a long-dead tactical officer, the faint, distorted static of a forgotten battle anthem. It was a digital ghost haunting a metal coffin, but it was the only key to mastering the ship's forbidden heart, the null space drive. Lena's condition worsened. Her small hands, once so deft at rewiring salvaged sensor arrays, now trembled uncontrollably. She spent most of her days in the stray dog's small med bay, watching the stardust swirl outside her viewport. Her eyes, once as bright as distant nebulae, growing dimmer. Elias worked with a frantic, consuming energy, fueled by caffeine, desperation, and the fading image of his daughter's smile. He felt like he was racing the tide, building a seawall out of sand while the ocean roared ever closer. His hands were raw, his face gaunt, his eyes burning from lack of sleep, but he pushed on, whispering promises to Lena through the comm unit, telling her stories of the stars she would one day visit, of the worlds they would see together. The final piece was a regulator core from a consortium survey drone he'd managed to disable and drag back to his workshop. It was a gamble. The drone's technology was generations ahead of the Wraiths, but he believed he could adapt its power cycling protocols to handle the immense, unstable energy surge the null drive required for ignition. He spent 3 sleepless nights fabricating a custom interface, his fingers flying across soldering points and microcircuitry, the ghost in the machine whispering warnings of incompatible architecture and cascading failures. Core containment failing. Eject. Eject, the voice hissed, a phantom of the ship's final moments. Ignore it, Elias muttered to himself, his own voice hoarse. We're not dying today. Finally, it was ready. He stood in the Wraith's cockpit, a cramped, angular space designed for a single pilot, a warrior, not a salvager. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and ancient decay. The displays around him were dark, the silence absolute. He took a deep, shuddering breath, his heart hammering against his ribs, and slotted the modified regulator core into the primary ignition console. He rerouted the main power umbilical from the stray dog, channeling his own ship's lifeblood into the dormant beast. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched, thick and mocking. Failure pressed in on him, a physical weight threatening to crush his spirit. Then, a low hum vibrated through the deck plates, a deep, resonant thrum that felt less like a sound and more like the awakening of something primal. One by one, the displays flickered to life, not with the crisp, sterile blue of consortium tech, but with a blood-red glow. Ancient diagnostic codes scrolled across the main screen in a language he barely understood. The fractured AI spoke, its chorus of voices merging into a single, chilling whisper. Null sequence initiated. Reality matrix unstable. All hands, brace for. The voice cut out, replaced by a surge of raw power that made the fillings in his teeth ache. The ship shuddered, not like a machine coming to life, but like an animal shaking off a century of slumber. On the power console, energy levels spiked, climbing past every safety threshold he had programmed. The regulator core was holding, but just barely. The casing glowing cherry red with strain. He had done it. The heart of the Wraith was beating again. But the awakening was not silent. The violent ignition of a banned null space reactor, even at minimal power, was like a scream in the quiet dark of the graveyard. It sent out a shockwave of exotic particles and gravitational distortions, a unique and unmistakable energy signature that traveled faster than light, an indelible fingerprint of heresy. Far away, at the edge of the graveyard, the Consortium Enforcer vessel Arbitrator was on a routine patrol. It was a blade of polished obsidian and cold light, a ship designed not for war, but for absolute enforcement, its systems constantly sweeping the void for anomalies. On its bridge, a sensor technician's console chimed, a placid, unassuming sound that heralded damnation. The technician, a young man with a face that had never known hardship, frowned at the readings. "Captain," he called out, his voice betraying a flicker of uncertainty, "I have an anomaly. Subspace resonance spike. Deep in the Kepler exclusion zone. Signature is impossible." The captain, a woman whose face was a mask of placid authority, turned from the main viewport. Her voice was calm, measured, the voice of someone for whom surprise was a foreign concept. "Define impossible." "Technician." He swallowed, tapping at his console. The signature matches, with 99.8% certainty, a pre-consortium null space reactor. The energy profile is chaotic, unstable, but it's online. The bridge fell silent. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The null drive was a myth, a boogeyman the Consortium used to justify its tight control over faster-than-light technology. To find one active was akin to a biologist discovering a living dragon. The captain's expression didn't change, but a cold light entered her eyes. "That sector is a tomb," she said softly. "It seems something has woken up." She straightened, her voice ringing with the quiet authority of absolute power. "Helm, set a course for the origin of that signal. Tactical, bring all primary weapon systems to full readiness. Communications, transmit a Priority 1 alert to Sector Command. Inform them an unsanctioned Class A threat has been identified. Subject is to be neutralized with extreme prejudice." Back in the heart of the graveyard, Elias felt a surge of triumph so fierce it almost brought him to his knees. He had done the impossible. He had a weapon, a key, a chance. He opened a channel to the stray dog. "Lena," he breathed, his voice cracking with emotion. "Lena, honey, I did it. I'm going to get your medicine. I promise." He could hear her weak but happy reply through the static, a sound that was worth more than all the salvage in the galaxy. But as he looked at the flickering tactical display, a new icon appeared on the edge of the sensor range. It was a standard Consortium IFF tag, but it was moving with a speed and purpose that made his blood run cold. It wasn't a freighter or a patrol cutter. It was a hunter. The icon resolved into a name, HFY Arbitrator, an enforcer. He felt the triumph curdle into ice in his stomach. They were coming for him. The ghost he had awakened had screamed, and the Consortium had heard. Elias Thorne, salvager, father, sat in the command chair of a phantom warship. The unstable hum of its forbidden engine, a prelude to a war he never wanted to fight. Outside, the searchlights of the Arbitrator began to sweep through the metallic graveyard, cutting beams of cold, white judgment through the darkness, hunting for the heresy that dared to disturb the dead. He was out of time, out of options, and utterly, hopelessly alone. Panic was a luxury Elias Thorne could not afford. The cold dread that seized his heart at the sight of the arbitrator was a fire he had to bank, turning its heat into a razor-sharp focus. The enforcer ship moved with an unnatural grace, its searchlights slicing through the nebula's dust clouds with methodical precision, not searching so much as dissecting the darkness. He knew its tactics. He'd scavenged the husks of pirate vessels that had been surgically dismantled by ships just like it. They wouldn't hail him. They wouldn't offer terms. They would pinpoint his location, confirm the heretical energy signature, and erase him from existence. His daughter's weak but hopeful voice still echoed in his ears, a stark reminder of the stakes. He wasn't just a salvager in a stolen ship. He was a father fighting for his child's last breath. His hands flew across the unfamiliar controls, the blood-red light of the displays painting his gaunt face in hellish tones. He had brought the Wraith to life, but he had no idea how to make it dance. "Tactical display," he commanded, his voice tight. A wireframe schematic of the surrounding debris field materialized. The arbitrator, a predatory shark gliding through the metallic bones. He was still tethered to the stray dog, a sitting duck. He needed to move, to vanish, to use the one impossible advantage he possessed. The fractured AI whispered in his ear, a chorus of dead men offering fragmented advice. Targeting solution. Sublight engines unresponsive. Preparing for null sequence. Null sequence, Elias repeated, his eyes locking onto a control stud that pulsed with a faint, malevolent light. It wasn't a lever or a throttle. It was a simple, ominous button, an invitation to tear a hole in the universe. He slammed his fist down on the emergency release for the umbilicals, severing his connection to his old life. Alarms blared on the stray dog's remote monitor, a faint cry he had to ignore. His focus was on the button. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was a one-way street. The moment he pushed it, Elias Thorne the Salvager would cease to exist, replaced by something else entirely. A ghost. A heretic. A target. He pushed the button. The sensation was not one of movement, but of violent deconstruction. Reality itself seemed to curdle around the cockpit. The stars outside the viewport twisted into incandescent smears of light, the familiar constellations bending and snapping like overstressed metal. A high-frequency whine drilled into his skull, and he felt a tearing sensation, as if his very atoms were being pulled apart and threaded through the eye of a needle. The AI screamed, not in a chorus of voices, but a single, unified shriek of pure, digital agony. The jump lasted less than a second, but it felt like an eternity of being unmade. Then, with a gut-wrenching lurch, the universe snapped back into place. The cockpit was silent, save for the thrum of the reactor and his own ragged breathing. He was slick with sweat, his muscles trembling. Outside the viewport, the scenery had changed. He was a dozen kilometers from his previous position. He was tucked behind the colossal Vars shattered ring of a dead orbital station. He had done it. He had punched a hole in space. On the bridge of the arbitrator, Captain Eva Rostova watched the tactical display with an unnerving calm. One moment, the target was there, a glaring red icon of forbidden energy. The next, it was gone, vanishing from every sensor in an instant. The technician stammered, "Signal gone. Captain, no FTL trail, no energy decay. It just ceased to exist. Rostova's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something akin to intellectual curiosity in their cold depths. "It did not cease," she corrected, her voice soft but firm. "It relocated." She gestured to another technician. "Run a predictive particle decay analysis on the last known vector. The null drive leaves a unique quantum shadow, a momentary instability in the local space-time fabric. It's faint, but it's there. Find it." Her crew worked with silent efficiency, their movements honed by years of enforcing the consortium's cold peace. They were not warriors. They were exterminators. And this was an infestation. Within seconds, a new icon blinked into existence on the tactical display. Rostova allowed herself a thin, bloodless smile. "There you are," she whispered. "Helm, lay in an intercept course. Tactical, deploy a stasis field generator. I don't want it destroyed. I want it pinned. That technology belongs to the consortium." Elias saw the arbitrator change course on his display, moving directly toward his new position with impossible speed and accuracy. They could track him. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The null drive wasn't a cloak of invisibility. It was just a faster way to run, and they could follow his footprints. And between him and any hope of escape lay the stray dog, with Lena inside. He had to go back. The thought was madness, but it was the only thought he had. He couldn't leave her. He strapped himself into the command chair, his knuckles white as he gripped the controls. "All right, you ghost," he muttered to the ship. "Let's see if we can teach you a new trick." He initiated another jump, a shorter one this time, a mere flicker of a few hundred meters, landing him in the shadow of a different derelict. The tearing sensation was just as violent, the AI's scream just as piercing. He did it again and again, a series of brutal, disorienting micro-jumps that threw him around the cockpit like a doll. He was using the graveyard itself as his shield, the mangled hulls of dead warships his only cover, blinking in and out of existence, trying to stay one step ahead of the hunter. Rostova watched the heretic vessel's erratic movements. It was a chaotic, unpredictable pattern, the work of a desperate amateur, but it was also effective. Her gunners couldn't get a solid lock. Every time they achieved a firing solution, the target vanished. "It's learning," she observed, her voice betraying no frustration. "It's using the debris field as cover, a clever rat in a maze of its own making." She anticipated his goal before he was even halfway there. The energy signature from the initial ignition point shows a secondary low-power reactor, a civilian model. His point of origin. He's not running. He's circling back. He left something behind. She brought up a schematic of the area. "Helm, bring us around the northern arc of the Iron Resolve. Tactical, blanket the area around that civilian signature with proximity mines. Let's close the trap." Elias felt the trap spring before he saw it. As he jumped into the open space near the stray dog, his sensors screamed. A dozen new contacts appeared, small, silent, and deadly. Proximity mines. The arbitrator glided into view from behind the massive dreadnought, its weapon ports glowing with malevolent energy. He was boxed in. The AI's whispers grew frantic. Weapons lock. Stasis field imminent. Evasive maneuvers. Compromised. He had one chance. Ignoring the mines. He pushed the Wraith forward on conventional thrusters, a dangerously slow crawl toward his old ship. "Lena, "Prepare for emergency docking. We're leaving now," he yelled into the comm. A beam of azure energy shot from the arbitrator, not a weapon of destruction, but of capture. It was the stasis field, a tractor beam on an evolutionary scale, designed to lock on to a target's local space-time and freeze it solid. Elias felt the ship shudder as the front edge of the beam brushed his stern. He twisted the controls, the Wraith groaning in protest as he forced it into a tight, desperate spiral, the stasis beam slicing through the space where he'd been a second before. He was meters from the stray dog's airlock now. The docking clamps screeched as they made contact, a hard, brutal connection. Now, Lena. He unstrapped himself, stumbling through the cramped corridor that led to the airlock, the ship shaking from near misses from the arbitrator's point defense cannons. The inner door hissed open, and he saw her, small and frail in the flickering emergency lights of the stray dog. Her face pale, but her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. He scooped her up, her body feeling impossibly light, and scrambled back into the Wraith's cockpit. He strapped her into the small auxiliary seat behind him, her small hand gripping his arm. "It's okay, baby," he whispered, his voice a raw, unconvincing lie. "We're gonna be okay." He looked at the console, at the image of the arbitrator moving in for the kill, at the mines closing in. They were trapped, but the stray dog was more than his home. It was a tool, and every good salvager knew how to use his tools. His fingers danced across a remote interface, accessing his old ship's engineering controls. He bypassed the safeties on the reactor, pushing the fusion core into a critical overload. "Captain," the arbitrator's tactical officer reported, his professional calm finally cracking. "The civilian vessel, its reactor is going critical." Rostova's eyes widened, the first genuine expression of surprise she had shown. "It's a diversion. All batteries. Fire on the heretic ship." It was too late. Elias hit the null drive button one last time, even as he remotely jettisoned the docking clamps. As the universe tore itself apart around him, the last thing he saw on his screen was the brilliant, silent flash of his old home, the stray dog, vaporizing in a miniature sun. The resulting shockwave of radiation and plasma slammed into the arbitrator, its powerful shields flaring brilliantly as they absorbed the blast, momentarily blinding its sensors. When the glare faded, the space was empty. The mines were gone. The civilian ship was a cloud of expanding gas, and the Wraith had vanished. On the bridge of the Wraith, drifting in the silent, star-dusted blackness far from the Kepler graveyard, Elias Thorne held his daughter close. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. They were alive. They were free. But they were also fugitives, adrift in a stolen war machine, with nothing but a fading hope and the galaxy's most powerful corporation hunting them. He looked at Lena, who had fallen into a fitful sleep, her breath catching in her chest. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. Aboard the arbitrator, Captain Rostova stood before the main viewport, staring at the dissipating plasma cloud. She had lost her quarry. The heretic had been smarter, more ruthless than she had anticipated. But he had also shown her his hand. She had a full sensor log of the null drive signature, its energy requirements, its weaknesses. She had seen its chaotic power, and she had an image pulled from the stray dog's broadcast signal just before it was destroyed the face of a desperate, determined man. "Communications," she said, her voice once again a blade of ice. "Transmit the sensor logs and the subject's image to High Command. Designate him a hostile entity, code-named Spectre. Recommend sector-wide lockdown and the immediate deployment of the Hunter Division. Tell them the heresy is real, and it is running." The silence of deep space was a lie. In the cockpit of the Wraith, it was a cacophony of groans, whispers, and hisses. The ship was wounded, the last desperate jump from the graveyard having pushed its already unstable systems to the brink. Elias worked with a grim, methodical focus, his hands moving with the practiced ease of a man who spoke the language of failing machinery. He rerouted power from non-essential systems, patched coolant leaks with emergency sealant, and coaxed the fractured AI through a series of diagnostic loops. The ghost in the machine was more agitated than ever, its fragmented voices a constant, unsettling chorus in his ears. "Hull integrity compromised. Life support failing. We are all dying." He ignored it, focusing on the soft, rhythmic sound of Lena's breathing. She was asleep in the auxiliary chair, wrapped in a thermal blanket, her face looking impossibly pale and fragile in the dim, red glow of the cockpit. She was the only signal he listened to, the only system that truly mattered. He had escaped the arbitrator, but he was a castaway on an ocean of stars. His ship a leaking life raft with a monster chained in its hold. The null drive, his only real advantage, was offline. The overload from the final jump had fried the custom regulator core he'd so painstakingly built. Without it, he was just another ship in the void, a slow, strange-looking vessel with a massive target painted on its hull. He needed parts, rare components that couldn't be scavenged from derelicts or bought on any reputable market. He needed to find a place where the consortium's reach was thin and questions weren't asked. A place where a man with a dangerous secret and a dying daughter could disappear. He needed to find a pirate haven. His charts, salvaged from the databanks of a dozen wrecks, showed one possible destination, a place called Tartarus, a hollowed-out asteroid city hidden deep within a treacherous, electrically charged nebula known as the Serpent's Coil. It was a haven for smugglers, assassins, rogue AIs, and every other shade of outcast the galaxy had to offer. Going there was a monumental risk. A man with a ship as unique as the Wraith would attract the wrong kind of attention, but desperation had stripped him of caution. He plotted a limping, sublight course, a journey that would take 3 agonizing days, every second of which he felt Lena's life slipping further away. During the journey, the ship's strangeness began to truly reveal itself. It wasn't just a machine, it felt aware. The AI's whispers sometimes synchronized with his thoughts, offering a fragmented tactical solution just as a problem occurred to him. He'd be struggling with a power fluctuation, and a voice would whisper, "Reroute, secondary conduit, port nacelle." He'd follow the ghostly advice, and the system would stabilize. It was like having a co-pilot who had been dead for 100 years. He also discovered the ship's log, not a written record, but a series of sensory imprints left behind by its original pilot, a man named Kalen Vance. Activating the log plunged Elias into vivid, terrifying echoes of the past. He experienced flashes of Vance's final battle, the gut-wrenching lurch of a null jump into the heart of an enemy fleet, the thunder of plasma cannons, the smell of burning electronics, and the coppery taste of his own blood. He felt Vance's fierce, desperate loyalty to a cause that had long since been ground into dust by the consortium, and his cold, calculating fury as he tore through enemy ships. The Wraith hadn't been a mere interceptor, it had been an assassin, a weapon designed to decapitate enemy command structures. Vance hadn't been just a pilot, he had been a zealot, a man who saw the consortium not as a corporation, but as a soulless plague. These echoes left Elias shaken, the lines between his own identity and the ghost of Kalen Vance blurring at the edges. They arrived at Tartarus under a shroud of electronic silence, the Wraith's unusual silhouette hopefully lost among the hundreds of other bizarre and modified ships crammed into the asteroid's docking bays. The city was a chaotic, multi-leveled warren carved from living rock, lit by the flickering neon of disreputable cantinas and the harsh, white glare of illicit workshops. The air tasted of recycled oxygen, spilled engine coolant, and desperation. Leaving Lena sleeping on the ship under the watch of the fragmented AI, Elias ventured into the city's depths, a hooded cloak obscuring his face, the schematics for the parts he needed on a datapad clutched in his hand. Tartarus operated on a brutal, simple economy of favors and violence. Information was its most valuable currency. He found his way to a data broker named Silas, a wizened old man whose body was more machine than flesh, his eyes glowing with the cold light of 1,000 secrets. Elias laid out his request schematics for a military-grade pre-consortium power regulator, untraceable and available for immediate purchase. Silas studied the schematics, his mechanical eyes whirring as they scanned the data. A low chuckle, like grinding gears, emanated from his voice box. "This is not a regulator," he rasped. "This is the key to a forbidden kingdom. The parts you seek, they don't exist on any open market. They are relics, hunted by the consortium with religious fervor." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But I know a man, a collector of such heresies. He calls himself the Curator. He resides in the lower levels, the sunken city. He might have what you need, but be warned, his price is never in credits." Elias's jaw tightened. What does he want? Silas's smile was a predatory slash of metal teeth. He wants stories, objects with a history. The more unique, the more tragic, the better. He gestured to the schematics. "The fact that you are seeking this component is a story in itself. Go to him. Tell him your tale. Perhaps he will be intrigued enough to trade." The sunken city was the deepest, most dangerous level of Tartarus, a place where the asteroid's original mining tunnels had breached a subterranean, bioluminescent ocean. The air was thick with moisture and the smell of decay. Here, forgotten things and forgotten people festered in the eternal twilight. The curator's workshop was a vast cavern, a museum of lost technologies and fallen empires. Ancient battle flags hung from the ceiling. Deactivated war droids stood like sentinels in alcoves, and display cases held weapons that had toppled dynasties. In the center of it all sat the curator, a massive, corpulent man reclining on a throne made from the command chair of a legendary starcruiser. He was old, his skin a pale, doughy white, his eyes small and black like polished stones. He regarded Elias with an air of profound boredom as he approached. "Another seeker," the curator sighed, his voice a surprisingly soft, cultured tenor. "Come to grovel for a piece of the past. State your business." "Try not to bore me." Elias presented the datapad. I need the components to build this." The curator glanced at the schematics and, for the first time, a flicker of interest sparked in his obsidian eyes. A null drive regulator. Ambitious. The consortium would flay you alive just for possessing these designs. He looked up at Elias, his gaze analytical. "You are not a collector. You are not a historian. You are a man running from something. You have the stink of desperation about you. That is a story. Tell it to me." Hesitantly at first, then with a torrent of pent-up grief and rage, Elias told him everything. He spoke of Lena, of the synaptic decay, of Ethelred Biosynth's cold rejection. He described finding the wraith in the graveyard, of awakening the ghost in its machine, and of his brutal, desperate escape from the arbitrator. He left out nothing, laying his soul bare in the dim, cavernous workshop. The curator listened, his fat fingers steepled before him, his expression unreadable. When Elias finished, his voice raw with emotion, the cavern was silent. "A father's love against a corporate god," the curator mused, a strange, almost wistful look on his face. A salvaged ghost ship against the inevitable tide of progress, an exquisitely tragic tale. He gestured to a heavily armored vault at the back of the cavern. "I have what you seek. A fully intact, perfectly preserved regulator core from the sister ship of the vessel you now command, the Banshee. It is a masterpiece of forbidden art." Elias felt a surge of hope so powerful it almost buckled his knees. "What is your price?" The curator's smile was slow and unsettling. "I told you, I collect stories, and you, Elias Thorne, are a story in the making. Your struggle, your defiance, it is a rare and beautiful thing in this cold, predictable galaxy." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "I will give you the regulator. In exchange, you will give me the end of your story. I have installed a unique, encrypted beacon in the core. It will not transmit your location. It is passive. But when your journey reaches its climax, when you either succeed in your quest or are finally cornered and destroyed by your enemies, the beacon will activate, transmitting a full sensory log of your final moments directly to me." He sat back, a connoisseur anticipating a fine wine. "I will get to experience your triumph or your tragic demise firsthand. That, to me, is a price worth paying." Elias felt a profound revulsion. This creature wanted to spectate his life or death struggle, to savor his potential agony as a piece of entertainment. But as he thought of Lena, pale and fading in the Wraith's medbay, he knew he had no choice. His life, his death, they were worthless compared to hers. "You have a deal," he said, his voice cold as the void. The curator's smile widened. He had his story, and Elias Thorne had his hope, bought and paid for with the promise of his own ending. As he carried the heavy, shielded case containing the regulator core back through the treacherous corridors of Tartarus, he didn't feel like a victor. He felt like a man who had just sold his own ghost. The journey back to the Wraith was a blur of paranoia. Every shadow in the dripping corridors of the sunken city seemed to hold a consortium agent. Every flicker of a neon sign felt like the flash of a targeting laser. Elias clutched the shielded case containing the regulator core to his chest. The dense weight of it, both a comfort and a curse. He was acutely aware of the curator's invisible leash, the passive beacon nestled within the device, waiting patiently to broadcast the final chapter of his life. He was no longer just a fugitive. He was a story being written, A tragedy in motion for an audience of one. When he finally cycled through the Wraith's airlock, the familiar scent of ozone and the ship's low, resonant hum felt like a homecoming. He found Lena awake, propped up in the medbay, watching a star chart projected on the wall. She turned as he entered, and the weak smile she gave him sent a fresh pang of desperation through his heart. Her tremors were worse, her breathing more shallow. Time was a luxury he was bleeding out of. "Did you find it, Daddy?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He knelt beside her, placing the case on the deck. "I did, sweetheart," he said, forcing a confidence he didn't feel. "This is it. This is the key. Just a little longer." He left her with a fresh nutrient pack and a promise to be back soon. A promise that felt heavy and fragile in the silent ship. He carried the regulator core to the engineering bay, a cramped and chaotic space where the heart of the null drive was exposed, a nest of crystalline conduits and alien alloys that pulsed with a faint, dangerous energy. The ghost in the machine seemed to sense the new component's arrival. The whispers grew more coherent, more focused, the voice of Kaylin Vance cutting through the static with startling clarity. The Banshee's heart, a sister's soul. Careful, thorn. Two ghosts in one machine can be a crowded haunting. The installation was a delicate, nerve-wracking surgery. The new core was a perfect match, but it was also a foreign object. As he slotted it into place and began connecting the power conduits, he felt a strange energy feedback through his tools, a psychic resonance that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The blood-red lights of the engineering bay flickered, and the AI's whispers intensified, no longer just in his ear, but seemingly inside his head. He felt a dizzying surge of another man's memories, Vance, standing in a similar engineering bay, watching a tech install the very same core in the Banshee, a ship and pilot he considered his only family. He felt Vance's pride, his confidence, and a deep, gnawing fear of the war they were about to plunge into. Elias shook his head, trying to clear the phantom memories. "Get out of my head," he growled, his voice echoing in the small chamber. The whispers subsided, but he knew the connection was growing stronger. The ship, the AI, and the ghost of its pilot were becoming inextricably linked with him. He was the new heart, pumping his will and desperation through its dead veins. Back in the cockpit, he initiated the power-up sequence. The surge was clean, stable. The new regulator core handled the immense energy transfer flawlessly. The null drive came online, its icon on the main display glowing with a steady, lethal light. He had done it. The Wraith was whole again, more powerful than before. He laid in a course for the Cygnus sector, the corporate headquarters of Ethelred Biosynth, a journey that would take him through the heart of consortium-controlled space. With the null drive, he could make the trip in a series of short, untraceable jumps, a ghost flitting through the cracks in their surveillance network. But as he prepared for the first jump, a priority alert flashed on his console. It was a broad-spectrum resistance channel he'd been monitoring, a network of whispers and coded messages from the galaxy's underbelly. The message was fragmented, encrypted, but the keyword sent a chill down his spine. Spectre, Hunter Division, Tartarus, and Stasis Web. His visit to Tartarus, his desperate search for the regulator, had not gone unnoticed. The consortium's net had tightened. They knew he was rearming, refueling, preparing for another move. And they had deployed their ultimate weapon against him. The Hunter Division wasn't like the Enforcers. They were a specialized fleet of ships commanded by the consortium's most ruthless tactician, a man known only as the Warden. Their sole purpose was to hunt and capture rogue FTL threats. And their signature weapon was the Stasis Web, a coordinated deployment of multiple stasis field generators that could lock down an entire sector of space, making null jumps impossible. They weren't just following his footprints anymore, they were building a cage around him. He had to assume the Warden knew his ultimate destination. Aethel Red Biosynth was the only logical target for a man with a dying daughter. The Warden would be waiting for him. The stasis web deployed. The trap set. Flying into the Cygnus sector now would be suicide. He stared at the star chart, his mind racing. He was a salvager. He didn't think like a soldier. He looked for weaknesses, for salvageable opportunities in a field of wreckage. He couldn't go through the consortium's defenses, so he would have to go around them. But there was no around in three-dimensional space, unless the ghost of Kalen Vance whispered a new, insane idea into his mind. The labyrinth, a path for ghosts, a road through hell. Elias's blood ran cold. He knew the labyrinth. It was a region of space every pilot, legal or otherwise, avoided at all costs. It was a chaotic nexus of unstable wormholes, gravitational anomalies, and rogue black holes. A graveyard where the laws of physics came to die. Ships that entered the labyrinth were never seen again. But the pre-consortium charts stored in the Wraith's databanks showed something else. A single, treacherous, constantly shifting path through the chaos. A route that the Unification War pilots had called the Ghost Run. It was a suicide run, a path so dangerous that even a ship capable of instantaneous jumps would be strained to its limits. But it would bypass the Cygnus sector entirely, bringing him out on the far side of Ethelred's headquarters, far from the Warden's anticipated trap. He looked at Lena, sleeping fitfully, her small face creased with pain. He had no choice. He was a father at the end of his rope, flying a dead man's ship, guided by a ghost, on his way to hell. He plotted the course, his hands surprisingly steady. Helm lay in a course for the Ghost Run, he said, his voice resonating with a grim authority that felt borrowed from Kalen Vance. The Wraith turned, its predatory silhouette vanishing into the blackness, not toward the glittering heart of the consortium, but toward a patch of space that looked like a jagged, ugly scar on the face of the galaxy. The first jump into the labyrinth was jarring. The tearing sensation of the null drive was amplified 100-fold by the warped space-time of the region. The ship screamed, not just the AI, but the very metal of its hull, as it was battered by gravitational shears and streams of exotic particles. The view outside the cockpit was a nauseating, phantasmagoric nightmare. Stars stretched and snapped back like rubber bands. Nebulae swirled in impossible colors, and the blackness itself seemed to pulse with a malevolent intelligence. The path was a razor's edge. He had to execute a series of precise micro-jumps, navigating between the crushing jaws of micro-singularities and the unpredictable currents of temporal distortions. One miscalculation, one jump a millisecond too late, and the Wraith would be torn apart, its atoms scattered across a dozen dimensions. He flew on instinct, his own and the Ghost's. Vance's memories became his own, a phantom muscle memory that guided his hands on the controls. He felt the phantom pilot's terror, his exhilaration, his iron-willed focus. They were two pilots in one body, flying one ship through a cosmic hurricane, after what felt like an eternity, but was likely only an hour. They broke through. The chaos of the labyrinth fell away, replaced by the serene, familiar blackness of normal space. The ship was battered, its hull scarred and pitted from the journey, but it was intact. He checked his position. He had done it. He was on the far side of the Cygnus sector. Before him lay the shimmering corporate perfection of Ethel-Red Biosynth's primary research and manufacturing facility, the Helix. It was a colossal space station, a double-helixed ribbon of pristine white alloys and softly glowing lights, a monument to the consortium's power to create and control life itself. He was past the warden's cage. He was at the dragon's hoard. But as his sensors swept the area, they picked up something that made his heart stop. A single, powerful energy signature right next to the Helix. A consortium IFF tag. The warden hadn't built a cage. He had set a lure. He had anticipated Elias's desperate, insane gamble. Had predicted he would take the one route no sane pilot would ever attempt. And he was waiting for him. The icon on the tactical display resolved into a name, a ship that was a legend in the darkest corners of the galaxy. HFY Golgotha, the warden's flagship. It was a brutal, ugly vessel, a mobile fortress designed for a single purpose: to break things. And it was sitting right on his doorstep. Elias had flown through hell, only to find the devil waiting for him on the other side. The Golgotha was an obscenity of a starship, where consortium vessels like the Arbitrator were sleek, sterile instruments of enforcement. The warden's flagship was a brutalist nightmare of gunmetal gray armor, jagged weapon emplacements, and exposed power conduits that pulsed with a sickening yellow light. It wasn't designed for elegance. It was designed to instill terror, a floating brick wall that crushed resistance through sheer, overwhelming force. It hung in the void beside the pristine, delicate beauty of the Helix station, like a butcher standing over a ballerina. And it was waiting for him. Elias felt a cold, sharp clarity settle over him. The panic, the desperation, they burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated resolve. The warden had outthought him, had predicted his every move. But the warden didn't know about the ghost in his machine. He didn't know about Kalen Vance. He didn't know that the Wraith was more than just a ship. It was a century-old vendetta waiting for a chance to strike. He's arrogant, Vance's voice whispered in his mind. No longer a fragmented echo, but a clear, cold, strategic analysis. He's left his flanks exposed. He expects a frontal assault or a desperate retreat. He doesn't expect a ghost to walk through his walls. The plan bloomed in Elias's mind, a fusion of his own salvager's cunning and Vance's military ferocity. He wasn't going to fight the Golgotha. He wasn't going to run. He was going to perform the greatest heist in history, right under the warden's nose. "Lena," he said, his voice calm and steady as he turned to his daughter. She was awake, her large, fearful eyes fixed on the monstrous ship outside the viewport. "I need you to be brave for me. We're going to play a little game of hide-and-seek." He initiated a series of rapid, impossibly short micro-jumps, not away from the Golgothas, but towards it. The Wraith flickered, blinking in and out of existence, each jump a mere 100 meters, a quantum stutter step that was too fast for the Golgotha's heavy targeting sensors to lock onto. On the bridge of the warden's flagship, tactical officers swore in frustration as their targeting solutions repeatedly failed. "Sir, the target is dancing," one of them reported, his voice tight with disbelief. "It's using null jumps for micro-maneuvers." It shouldn't be possible. The energy cost, the stress on the hull, the warden, a tall, skeletal figure who stood motionless in the center of the bridge, his face hidden behind a polished chrome mask, simply watched the display. "It is not a machine," he said, his voice a synthesized, metallic rasp. "It is an anomaly. Continue attempts to acquire a lock and deploy the interdictor drones. Box it in." Elias saw the drones coming. Small, fast hunter-killers designed to saturate an area with microstasis fields, creating a web of localized space-time traps. He was being corralled, pushed toward the Helix station. It was exactly what he wanted. He made one final, daring jump. A flicker that took him past the drone screen and into the shadow of the colossal space station itself. He was so close that its gleaming white hull filled his entire viewport. He engaged the magnetic clamps, locking the Wraith onto the station's superstructure like a parasite. To the Golgotha's sensors, he had simply vanished again, his energy signature lost in the massive output of the Helix's own reactors. "He's on the station's hull," the warden stated, a hint of what might have been admiration in his synthesized voice. "A bold move. He intends to use the station as a shield. He thinks we won't fire on a civilian facility." He turned to his tactical officer. "You have your orders." Elias knew he had only minutes. Leaving Lena strapped into her chair with a promise he prayed he could keep, he moved to the rear of the ship. He wasn't there to fight. He was there to salvage. He donned an EVA suit, grabbed a plasma cutter and a set of diagnostic probes, and cycled the airlock. He was outside, clinging to the hull of his ghost ship, the star-dusted void beneath his feet and the incomprehensible scale of the Helix station stretching out before him. The station wasn't just a research facility, it was the primary manufacturing and distribution hub for Ethelred's gene therapies. His probes, guided by schematics he'd bought in Tartarus, quickly located what he was looking for: a primary coolant line for the cryo-storage laboratories. He began cutting on the Golgotha's bridge. The warden gave a single, curt nod. Fire. A beam of focused energy. Not a destructive plasma blast, but a high-frequency disruption pulse, shot from the flagship. It struck the Helix, not at the point where the Wraith was hidden, but on the far side of the station. It was a surgical strike, designed not to destroy, but to disable. Alarms blared across the Helix, power systems fluctuated, and emergency containment fields engaged. Elias felt the hull beneath him shudder. He was running out of time. He made the final cut, prying open a maintenance hatch. Inside was a network of conduits, carrying the lifeblood of the station. He attached a custom-built siphon, a device he'd fabricated during the journey, and connected it to the Wraith's small cargo hold. The siphon hissed to life, its powerful pumps drawing the specialized, supercooled fluid from the station's veins into his ship. He wasn't stealing the gene therapy itself, which would be stored in heavily guarded vaults. He was stealing the raw, uncoated retroviral substrate it was made from, stored in bulk in the cryo labs. He was stealing the ink, not the finished book. Suddenly, a section of the hull beside him exploded outwards. The warden wasn't just disabling the station, he was systematically punching holes in it, trying to flush him out. A squad of Ethelred security droids, spider-like machines with mounted plasma rifles, crawled out of the breach, their optical sensors glowing red as they locked onto him. Elias scrambled back, drawing the heavy-duty plasma cutter. It wasn't a weapon, but it was all he had. The first droid lunged, and he met it with a searing blast from the cutter, melting its metallic leg and sending it spinning off into the void. But there were too many. He was being backed into a corner. The weapon! Vance's voice roared in his head. A surge of pure combat adrenaline. Use my weapon. Elias didn't know what he meant, but his body moved on its own. He scrambled back into the Wraith's airlock, sealing the door just as a plasma bolt melted the spot where he'd been standing. Back in the cockpit, he saw the droids swarming over his ship's hull. His gaze fell upon a covered switch on the console he'd never noticed before. A control locked by a biosignature seal. On instinct, he placed his hand on it. The seal flashed green, recognizing a phantom echo of Kalen Vance's DNA in his own stressed system. He flipped the switch. Outside, sections of the Wraith's hull plating slid back, revealing not guns, but a series of projector nodes that began to glow with an eerie, white light. A holographic field enveloped the ship, and the image of the Wraith wavered, twisted, and reformed into a perfect, shimmering replica of the Banshee, its sister ship. The security droids, their simple logic circuits overwhelmed by the sudden appearance of a second, identical vessel, hesitated. In that moment of confusion, Elias hit the thrusters, disengaging the clamps and blasting away from the helix. The siphon had pulled just enough of the substrate. It would have to be enough. He initiated a null jump, not into the void, but into the helix itself. It was an act of impossible, suicidal precision. For a fraction of a second, the Wraith existed inside the station's primary superstructure, phasing through walls and decks before re-emerging from the other side. The ship screamed, alarms blaring as its hull integrity dropped to critical levels, but he was through. He was clear. On the Golgotha, the Warden watched the heretic vessel reappear, battered but free. He had the substrate. He had won the battle. But the fight was far from over. Elias raced against time in the ship's medbay, the stolen retroviral substrate shimmering in a containment field. Using the medical data from Lena's doctors and the ship's advanced bioscanners, he began the painstaking process of coding the raw material, of teaching it to fight the decay in his daughter's cells. It was a process that should have taken a team of geneticists months. He had only hours. As he worked, the curator's beacon, silent for so long, finally activated. His end was approaching. A secure channel opened on the main display. It was the curator, his fat, pale face looking on with rapt attention. Magnificent. The old creature breathed. A truly exquisite climax. The ghost in the machine, the devil at the door, and a father's desperate, impossible gambit. Will you succeed? Or will the Warden's hounds tear you apart before the cure is ready? Elias ignored him. His focus absolute. He finished the final sequence, loading the freshly coded serum into an auto-injector. He turned to Lena. She was barely conscious, her breath a faint whisper. "It's okay, baby," he whispered, his voice thick with tears. "I'm here." He administered the injection, then slumped into the pilot's chair, his body and spirit utterly spent. He looked at the tactical display. The Golgotha was closing in, flanked by a dozen hunter-killer ships. This was the end of the run. He had the cure, but he had nowhere left to hide. Then, something impossible happened. New contacts appeared on the display, dozens of them, jumping in from all directions. They weren't consortium ships. They were a ragtag fleet of pirate vessels, smugglers, and resistance fighters, the denizens of Tartarus. and at their head was a signal he recognized the curator's personal, obscenely luxurious star yacht. The curator's voice boomed over the open channel. The consortium's Hunter Division has blockaded this sector in violation of the Free Trade Accords of Tartarus, he declared, his tone dripping with false indignation. They have illegally impeded the passage of a valued client. Such aggression will not stand. Elias stared, dumbfounded. The curator, the cold, detached spectator, had intervened. He hadn't just come to watch the end of the story, he'd come to change it. He had decided that this particular story was too good, too rare, to have such a predictable, a tragic ending. He was a collector, and he had decided to preserve his favorite piece. The Warden's fleet, faced with a sudden, chaotic swarm of hostiles, was thrown into disarray. The battle was fierce, but short. The pirates, fighting with a ferocity born of desperation and a hatred for the consortium, overwhelmed the disciplined but outnumbered hunters. The Golgotha itself, targeted by the combined firepower of the entire pirate fleet, was forced into a humiliating retreat. As the chaos subsided, Elias looked back at his daughter. A flicker of color had returned to her cheeks. Her breathing was stronger, deeper. The serum was working. The ghost of Kalen Vance whispered one last time, his voice faint, filled with a sense of peace. "We did it, Thorn. We gave them a future." The voice faded, leaving only silence. Elias Thorn, salvager, father, heretic, looked out at the stars, his ship battered, his future uncertain. He was a marked man, the consortium's most wanted. But he was not alone. He had his daughter. He had his ghost ship. And he had an entire galaxy of outcasts who had seen one man stand against an empire and win. His war was over, but the rebellion he had accidentally started was just beginning. And in the heart of the Wraith, a little girl was dreaming of the stars for the first time in a very long time.